New book of the Bible, Exodus. Exodus chapter 1. Let's dive right in. It says that these are the names of the sons of Israel who went to Egypt with Jacob, each with his family: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. The descendants of Jacob, number 70 in all. Joseph was already in Egypt. Basically, it's saying it's picking up where it left off at the end of Genesis, where Joseph's family came to see him in Egypt and he provided for them during the times of famine. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died, but the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly and increased in numbers and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. So we learn that Joseph has passed away, all of his brothers have passed away, that generation has passed away. Basically, all the good that Joseph did was forgotten as a new regime would come in. It says in verse 8, then a new king, or a new Pharaoh, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous, and if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. Verse 11, so they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labor, and they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. They took the Israelites as slaves, they put them into bondage and into forced labor. This was actually prophesied in the book of Genesis. We were told about how there would be a period of, I believe, about 400 years where the people of Israel would be in bondage, they would be in captivity, but that God would raise up a deliverer. We are making huge leaps in regards to time. So Joseph's passed away. We're talking about, Joseph lived 110 years old, it says, and I believe he started serving when he was 30. So for 80 years, Joseph really helped to rule and to reign in Egypt. But then you start talking of hundreds of years later, they're in captivity and in bondage. We pick up in verse 12. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labor in brick and mortar, with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labor, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, when you are helping the Hebrew women during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see that the baby is a boy, kill it. But if it's a girl, let her live. They were trying to population control the Hebrews or the Israelites. They basically, at this time, they were trying to, just put it bluntly, they were basically having forced abortions of male children. God saw this as wicked. This goes against the very tenets of the gospel, the very tenets of the word. God said it best this way through Jesus Christ. The thief comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. But Jesus said, but I come that you might have life and life more abundantly. The Egyptian Pharaoh tells the midwives to do something that's wicked before the Lord. And the midwives, verse 17, however, I want you to catch this, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. They didn't care what Pharaoh said. They didn't care what the world said. They didn't care what people who were against God said. They said, look, no, we know the way God has set things to operate and how God has set things into motion. God values life. We value life. Verse 18, then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? And the midwives answered Pharaoh, the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. Basically, they said, yeah, your girls, Pharaoh, they're kind of soft. They said the Hebrew women, they're tough, they're strong. Just like the men who are building your pyramids, the women are tough. They give birth before we come. We don't even get to go. Verse 20, so God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, every Hebrew boy that is born he must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Chapter 2, this is where we'll begin to set up the life of Moses, who God would eventually call to be the deliverer of the people of Israel. Chapter 2 starts off by saying that there was a man of the tribe of Levi who married a Levite woman. This is the priestly tribe. This will be significant later because Moses will be a priest. Moses and his brother Aaron, really, they have incredible roles when it comes to their relationship with God. Moses had an amazing relationship with God. We'll learn more about him all throughout our stories to come. It says that when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Now, I want to clarify real quick that when it says when she saw that he was a fine child or a beautiful child, your translation may say, it doesn't mean that because he was pretty, she kept him. It means that when she saw that he was a gift from the Lord, she hid him for as long as she could. She didn't want to throw him in the Nile. She knew that that wasn't what God would desire. God had given her the gift of life. She wasn't going to throw it to the side. But when she could hide him no more, she got a papyrus basket and she made it for him. She coated it with tar and with pitch. And then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. In many ways, it's almost like the ark that Noah made. She made like a mini ark. I don't know. Maybe she had heard the story of what had happened with Noah and how God preserved Noah. I don't know. Maybe she was just thinking, God, this is the best that I can do in the situation that I'm in. God, I don't know. I'm going to do my part. I'm going to trust that you're going to do your part. And she puts him in the river, but she puts him in the river in a basket. Then Pharaoh's daughter, verse 5, I don't believe this is a coincidence. I believe this is divine appointment, and I believe the history of Moses' life will show us this. Went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her female slave to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women and nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. So Moses was taken back to his mother, and his mother nursed him. But when he became of age, he lived in Pharaoh's household, and he lived as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. It says in verse 11, and this is talking about how Moses would eventually leave Egypt because of some things that took place in his life. Verse 11, one day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So Moses saw an injustice taking place against one of his own people. And Moses was, one of the things you'll see about Moses is that he was not an apathetic individual. He was not someone who just ignored things that were going on. Moses was a passionate man. He was a man of great zeal, if you will. And his zeal led him to do something that was quite rash, that was quite violent, and he killed the Egyptian who was taking advantage of the Hebrew. After he did it, he buried him. And the next day he went out and he saw two Hebrews fighting, and he asked the one in the wrong, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? And the man said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian? Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I have done, it's become known. Verse 15, when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and fill the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, why have you returned so early today? They answered, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. And where is he? He asked his daughters. Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. Moses agreed to stay with the man, who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, I've become a foreigner in a foreign land. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning. He remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. God is setting the stage for what is going to take place. He's about to deploy Moses into his destiny. He's going to call him into Egypt. He's going to take the children of God out of Egypt. There's going to be many miracles, many signs that are going to take place. But God gives us a little historical context in chapters 1 and chapter 2 that shows us almost the prequel. If you were to watch a movie, the prequel to a movie, the behind the scenes of what's taking place. And there's some cool things that we see along the way. We saw that, Egypt forgot what Israel and Israel's family had done for them, and so they began to oppress them. Sometimes you'll notice in your life there are people who might wrong you or do things that oppress you. They might have forgotten how you were kind to them before, or you might find yourself in a tough situation. Really, it's a picture of how in life sometimes we have people who will oppress us, and we have people who will attack us. I would say to you, stand strong and continue to do things God's way. God's your defender. We learned about the midwives who, even when Pharaoh gave an order that went against, God's heart, they said, no, we're going to do things God's way. And it says because of that, not only did God protect them, but God provided families for them of their own. It's really a continuation of the principle we saw in the life of Joseph, that when you do things God's way, God will continue to go before you and God will continue to provide for your future. Then we see about how Moses' mom lived by faith and built a mini ark similar to Noah, and that because of her faith, God preserved the life of Moses. God found a place for Moses, and Moses was raised up in Pharaoh's household, if you will. Eventually, Moses has a moment where he's bothered by the oppression that the Egyptians are doing towards the Hebrews. He lashes out in his frustration and he murders a man. This is something that we'll see as a pattern in Moses' life, not murder, but for as self-controlled as Moses was, there were moments in Moses' life where he would lash out, where he would lose his self-control, where he would react or respond, and he had what I would call unaddressed emotional anger. This was a pattern in Moses' life, and it would cost him later on down the road. There were some things that God may have had for him that he missed out on because of the way that he acted. I share that with you, and I want to close with this. We need to watch and guard our emotions, because many mighty men of God, many mighty women of God have missed out on the fullness. They might have received part, but they missed out on the fullness of all that God had for them because they got in the way of what God wanted to do for them. Let's learn from the stories and apply them to our lives. Be blessed today.